Hey, Steve.
Hey, man.
Thanks for joining me today. I'm excited to get into this stuff because self-mastery in particular is something that I work on in my own life. I know a lot of leaders do as well, whether they're working out for themselves or through the lens of the people that they're leading. A lot of the people that listen to this podcast in general from the corporate world, but from other places as well. And you've had such an interesting journey yourself on moving through different phases of your life, but always kind of working on yourself through self-mastery, no matter what phase of your life that you're in. And I wanted to talk a little bit about today and let other people hear kind of how you've moved through that journey and been able to do that for yourself as an individual, as a family man, as a professional, and things like that. Thanks so much for being here today. I would love to start with maybe having you tell our audience a little bit about where you started off with on your journey as a performer and kind of how that's evolved as far as your career to this point.
Yeah. I'm old now, so this is going way back. But when I was a younger man, I was a bit of a juvenile delinquent, and I got into a lot of trouble when I was a kid, and I really didn't have a direction or a plan going into high school. I grew up south of Buffalo in a very rural dairy farming community, and it was a situation where if you wanted to leave, most of the people went into the military. There was a few that went to college, and they were the smart kids, in the AP classes and stuff. But we had, in New York State, there is now a Regents diploma. But at the time, we had what was called a local diploma for kids that had no hope of going on to higher education. And then we had the Regents diploma for the smart kids. Now it's just, it's everything is the Board of Regents in New York. But at the time, you could literally take half of the course load and half of the course requirements and still get a high school diploma. So I went that route. And when
you wanted to get out as soon as possible, or
I just wasn't a student, I wasn't a student at the time. Education, I came from a long line of bullshitters and hustlers and blue collar workers, sweat of your back. And education wasn't something that was valued, really. Until later, my dad quit school when he was 14 years old because he got kicked out of his house because of his stepfather, and started working, sweeping floors at the same place he retired from 60 years later, where he was the head of the art department. That kind of salt of the earth kind of people. And so, performing wasn't even on the radar. And then I had to take an art. I was into art, but I had to take another elective. An arts elective. So everybody said chorus was easy. You could hide. It's a big crowd. It's an easy
just
crowd.
Hide behind the last row and you'll be fine.
Yeah. So I joined chorus, and on the first day, I'll never forget, my chorus teacher, Georgia Miller, who changed my life, was walking around, and she heard me singing, and she said, "How come I don't know you?" And it was that moment right there where, I felt like, oh, maybe I'm good at something. Maybe I'm good at something.
Had you not really felt that way up to that point?
I had never done it. I
mean, feeling like you're good at something.
No,
like something innately came to you.
No, making people laugh innately came to me. I was a bit of a clown, but all of my friends excelled in sports. I really never played sports. I played baseball, but I was mediocre at best until my last year. I was always kind of this late bloomer. And then chorus came around, and it was like, oh, you have an innate ability that nobody taught you, nobody can change, and nobody can take away from you. And that felt really empowering. And I started pursuing it. I joined the high school performances, started getting the leads in the play. And it was like, okay, I'm going to go to college for this. And I remember my mother saying, honey, college isn't for everybody.
Thanks, Mom.
Why don't you just, but listen, because this is a common theme in my life. Uh-huh. And why don't you just get a job at Motorola, which was the factory? They're hiring. You could work there forever. You could retire. You could have a nice, and that just felt like getting the keys to my own prison. And I just said, no way. And I didn't have the grades to go to a 4-year school, but I found a way. I found a junior college that had a theater program with an acting track, which was unheard of at the time. So I was getting on stage my freshman year of college. And after I left high school, I finished my 4-year degree with a 3.8 overall average. And it was a liberal arts education. I didn't go the BFA route. I went bachelor's degree with a emphasis in theater acting track. So it wasn't until I broke free of that pervasive talk in my environment where I started learning how to learn. And the only reason I learned how to learn is out of spite.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
Definitely. I just remembered that conversation with my mother. And I just remember thinking, I'll show you, and I did. I showed her. And after that 4 years, 2 years, I transferred to a bigger school, Buffalo State College, which was a really, that was the art school at the time. And UB was the smart school. That's what we would say. Mm-hmm. And they had a great theater program. And one of my mentors there, as I was leaving and looking at graduate schools, said, Steve, don't go to graduate school. It's not for everybody. He said,
you're like, have you met my mom?
Yeah. Said it's not for everybody. If I had money to bet, you're going to leave after a year anyway. Just go to New York. And I thought, well, I'll fucking show you. So I went to graduate school and I got an MFA degree. And then I moved to New York. And about 2 years into New York, I was the last man standing from my studio. And I remember a friend saying, how long are you going to keep this up? Why don't you just leave? Go to a smaller market. And I said, well, I'll fucking show you. So I'm a man driven by spite, but and then now I have a 25-year career and there's too many ups and downs to say, but that was the start of it. And,
is that mindset too? I mean, there's the spite element of it. There's the like, okay, I'm going to do this. Some of ego's wrapped in that as well. And then you had those moments where like, no, I'm good at this. And then it reinforces that narrative once you go to school and you see that report card and there's a 3.8 there. You're like, no, it really is true. Yeah. I can do this. Is that kind of what, like you said, you became more of a lifelong learner? Because I've seen that theme as your friend throughout your life. Like you decide to learn about something and you dive deep.
Oh, I do. I can now. I went to Iceland at the end of August, and I'm pretty much a scholar on Norse mythology now. So ask me anything, and I'll tell you.
Why not?
Yeah, because that's just how I am, and I think that we'll talk about risk and reward later, but that investment and reward feels good, man. That is a dopamine rush for me. And to me, that's living. You know, I've gone through several incarnations of spirituality and spiritual paths, you know, but, you know, right now I'm thinking, well, if this is my only time on this rock, do I want to spend it being a connoisseur of vodka and cigars and, you know, microbrews, or do I want to learn as much as I can and acquire as many skills as I can before I can't, you know? And I think it's the latter for me at this point in my life.
How has that skill accumulation, and I've seen you do that. I've seen you do it with body self-mastery, as far as very intense workouts and workout philosophies, even before the whole CrossFit phase. Like, I feel like you were doing that way before that. I've seen you challenge yourself, and then others around you seem to magnate, or like it's magnetic thing that happens where they're like, oh, that's really cool what he's doing. And they want to do it too. I'm wondering if there's a through line there as well, because you've created a lot of your own work as a performer. Yeah. Like when you were feeling frustrated years ago now, I remember you went out and just decided, well, if they're not going to cast me in a movie, I'm going to write my own movie and cast myself as the lead.
Right.
And you did that. And the meetings came out of that. Like, you don't stay in an action. That's not you. You decide to just start going.
No. And I think that just comes, and I'm sure you feel this too. It comes from just being a creative. You can't choose whether or not you're a creative person. You know, I don't think you can acquire creative skills, you know, like a mechanic. You could acquire these skills to do creativity, but you can't choose whether or not you're a creative human, you know? So I think what that's born out of, Aaron, is moments of, I used to say this, there was this great documentary called Riding Giants in the early 2000s, maybe even the late 90s, with Laird Hamilton. And he's talking about finding big waves, right? And there's this quote of him after surfing this enormous wave on this like hydrofoil board that he invented so he wouldn't fall off, you know, and he's just looking at the ocean. And after that wave, he's like, you know, this is always the worst part for me. He's like, after the wave is over, I feel like a dragon slayer on the day that he killed the last dragon. And I'm just like, oh, that resonated so hard with me. And it still does. You know, I heard that, 15, almost 20 years ago. And that still resonates with me. So in these moments where my chosen profession, my art, is unforgiving with being silent or dormant, I need to channel that creativity in something else. And that has come in many different forms: fitness, you know, knowledge, just reading on different subjects. But I see this in my son too. There's this switch that happens where I just can't help it. I can't multitask. I've never been a multitasker. It actually frustrates me because once my mind latches onto something, the world disappears and I need to complete it. Right. And to the point of mass frustration. Oh, I just got a little bit of an echo. Oh, you fixed it. Good job, man. So to the point of mass frustration, it's like you're talking about the CrossFit phase. You know, I set out to beat CrossFit. That's why I got into CrossFit. I'm like, you know, I have this, I have this skill set and this knowledge base. And at the time, early CrossFit time, I was looking at the science, and the science was really willy-nilly. And over time, the community of CrossFit, the broader CrossFit community, added to the science that CrossFit is now built on. But at the time, that wasn't it. It was hypotheses and guesswork from an aged coach who had a very small group of people that this thing was working for, but the science behind it hadn't been dived into, wasn't really fleshed out. And I thought I had the science, and I'm like, I'm going to take athletes to the CrossFit Games and I'm going to prove a point, and I did, but I only got as far as taking an athlete to 4th place in the world. So that's not that bad.
In the world. Yeah.
That's
only.
not, but,
yeah, totally.
But, it became an obsession to beat CrossFit. And then, by the time it was too late for me to leave, I thought, by the time I left and moved on to something else, I feel like maybe I should have said, all right, I've squeezed this lemon as much as I'm going to squeeze it. And now I need to move on to something else. So, that's
so interesting though. Yeah. I mean, because that's what you do, right? Like you became interested in your own evolution of fitness.
Yeah.
And then you really wanted to deep dive on the subject.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there was a part of you that started to see that you're about to kill your last dragon personally. And so you decided like, I'm going to apply this science for everyone to be able to learn it. And I'm going to prove to these people that think they know what they're doing that actually this is a better way to go about it.
Maybe, to expand and expand and expand. So I never really killed the dragon.
Yeah, exactly. That way you don't have to be depressed.
Yeah, exactly, dude. Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And it's interesting how things like, to your words, that you get obsessed about, like you don't want to multitask, that switch is flipped and you deep dive on something.
Yeah.
When you apply those subjects to yourself, in this case, physical fitness, it affects other areas of your life.
Completely.
I mean, you became known as like that really good actor that is super fit. And that led to roles and to getting into casting rooms.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I made that decision early on when I was doing King Lear, my last stage performance. I was doing King Lear in St. Louis, and I'm seeing a bunch of actors in New York because that's what happens. You move to New York, you audition in New York, and then you go out of town for 6 months. That's just how it is. But I kept on seeing actors in New York. Temping was huge at the time, and bartending, of course, waiting tables. And I just said, well, that kind of lifestyle isn't really conducive mentally or physically to what I'm trying to do. So why don't I do something that's transferable, There
you go. Yeah.
To my real profession, to my real goals. And so while I was doing that final show, I got my personal trainer certificate, which at the time was way different than it is now. Now you could go online and you could actually just sit and take a test with a book. But at the time it was like, I just got out of grad school, man. I just finished my thesis project dissertation and this rivaled it. I had to hand in like a 50-page long essay, case study workbook that I worked on to get this personal trainer certificate. And so I was doing that in tandem with doing King Lear. So by the time I was done with that job, I came back to New York and I went right into a gym and I just started working in a gym for my lifeline job.
And that's such a great way for other leaders to be able to think about when they're trying to upgrade their own skill sets. And as well as being that example for the people around them too, right? Like if you're leading a team and no matter what field you're in the arts or someplace else completely different in the business world, for instance, like if you are working on yourself with a skill that helps you in your current situation. And it might be just the fact that you need to get higher salary. And so if you get this specific degree or personal training thing or whatever, you'll be able to bump that up.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, you're working on something on yourself that makes you more marketable in general.
For sure.
And it's interesting. I wonder if there are ways for leaders to start thinking about that as well.
You're saying something, and it's really making my synapses flare here. Is that, when you're talking about leaders, because if I take 3 steps back and look at myself from from an observational standpoint, yes, I have led people. Sure. And, I'm probably a leader in more people's lives than I'm even aware of. Right. Mm-hmm. But that is born out of not my desire to be one. Yeah. That is born out of working on myself. Yeah. And having other people observe it. Do you know? So,
and isn't that the purest form of that?
I think
the purest form of leadership. Yeah. Because it's not ego driven specifically for the outcome of I want to lead people.
Right. So I think that what you're saying is, for me, as you're speaking, this is how my brain is deciphering what you're saying is, the best leader leads himself or herself by example, and people just kind of, I think, naturally and organically fall in line. But I don't think that a leader can demand self-mastery out of somebody that they're leading unless they're living that.
I see it all the fucking time.
They have.
I agree with you, but there are people that have not gotten that message. Yeah. Especially in America.
It's I don't want to get in trouble here or offend people, but we're talking about fitness. We're talking about fitness here. So I could say that, in my journey in the fitness world, or even now, I'm super into jujitsu now. It's mm-hmm. There's this type of person that has always bothered me. And these are the people that I just kind of ignore. It's really hard for me to even make eye contact with them. Is the person that would rather tell you what to do and how to do it than live it themselves. And mm-hmm. what's unfortunate about these people is that they're not even receptive to hearing it. Like, you couldn't say to somebody like this, hey, you have, 5 clients that you're telling to eat like this and move like this and work like this, but you're 40 pounds overweight. And I see you having Dunkin' every morning. Like, you have to know that there is a disconnect. Please have self-awareness enough to know that there's a disconnect between what you're demanding from somebody and what you're living, mm-hmm. And, it goes back to practice what you preach. I hate cliches, but dude, if you're going to try to make your community, your circle of influence more like your ideal of what it is you want, you better be your fucking ideal.
That's so good. It's absolutely true too. Like, it doesn't need to be any harder than that. Like, do really the thing that you are expecting of other people. Like, master it yourself, and just know that as you walk through the world, other people are going to notice that.
And also, you're going to find that you attract people that you want to be around.
There you go. So true. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about, am I positioning myself well in order to get this result that I want? You can just work on it yourself and let it gravitate towards you and trust the process.
And I know it sounds woo. It's not woo woo, dude. Yeah, it is not. It's just, it's people are drawn to what they are like or what they want to be like.
They want to be like. Yeah,
you know.
It's totally true. I remember that story you told me about when you were on set one time, and I think it was 30 Rock, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
And you had the chance to observe someone who's an icon in their own field. Would you tell us that story? Because I love hearing that through your filter of kind of the observer on set that day as a guest.
Is this the Alec Baldwin story?
Yeah.
It was a great day. First of all, Alec Baldwin at the time, this guy has gotten a bad rap. I can honestly say, I worked with him for two weeks, which, isn't a very long time, but I've worked with people for one day that I just immediately understood that they were an asshole. and I'll tell you that Alec Baldwin was not an asshole. He was a very great guy. He was a pro, like I had never really experienced before. In television, you don't always have the same directors. So you have a solid cast, especially with a show that has multiple seasons like 30 Rock, right? So you have a first AD who's pretty solid and steady, unless they get a bigger job and then it's a big farewell. But after the first 3 or 4 episodes, sometimes even after the pilot episode, the director that was involved in the creation process leaves. They're gone. And they have jobber directors come in per the union and just do one-off episodes. So it's like the series regular cast, they are the show. And this stranger director that hasn't been working on the show for 7 years like the rest of the cast.
So fascinating. Most people don't know this. Yeah, it's totally typical.
Right. Comes in with ideas, or maybe they're just painting by numbers and they're just doing it super elementary and safe. Whatever the case is, they're obviously not hacks. They're directing at a certain
professionals
level.
At that level. Yeah.
But this particular director was great, but Alec Baldwin comes onto the set and he asked the director one question, and I'm an observer, and I'm the type of person that really picks up on nuance and subtle nuance. And Alec comes on set and he introduces himself to me and the rest of the guest artist. And he goes up to the director and he's super cordial and says hello. And he asks him one question. And I can't even remember what the director said, but it obviously wasn't the answer that Alec Baldwin wanted.
It was a test. The director didn't know it was a test.
And Alec Baldwin kind of goes, oh, great. Like, taps him on the shoulder, turns around, and for the rest of that day, he completely directed every scene from inside the scene. And what I mean by that is he wasn't saying, hey, why don't you go there to the other actors and stuff like that? But he was manipulating his performance in such a way that just made the scene 20 times better.
Huh.
For instance, he had this line where he was crossing to somebody and he was to say something super dry, and he did it with tape rolling. He did it like 25 times. Nobody called cut. Nobody said, let's do it again. Nobody said, let's do another take. He just kept on doing over and over and over, and then going back. Let's go back and then do it again. I'm going back to one. And then he'd do it again, and then going back to one, do it again. And then on like the 20th one, the actress that he was speaking to just like busted up laughing. And he turns to camera and he's like, we could use that, right? We got it. He knew what he was going to do. He knew he wanted her to do that. And he just directed that scene from the inside. And I'll tell you, piggybacking on what we were just talking about, I'm like, oh, this guy is leading the set because the person who was hired to isn't, right?
Leading from within, right? Like I'm wondering about all these different connections now about like, there's so many times I talk to people that are maybe in a larger organization and they've taken on a victim mentality. That they can't affect anything, that they're stuck. We've heard about quiet quitting a lot lately as well, like doing the bare minimum because you feel like you don't have any power.
Right.
And I realize we're talking about Alec Baldwin right now, but at the same time, how many times might we have more power than we think to at least control our own actions within the structure to affect change?
Sure. But also, we're talking about an Alec Baldwin that had already been in the news for being an asshole husband, a psychopathic dad. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
All of this shit. And within 10 minutes, he made a set full of series regulars and guest stars feel safe, feel comfortable. And he gave us all permission to explore because he did a 20 take scene. It's just like, no harm, no fucking try shit, you know?
Yeah.
And he did that without saying anything. It was pretty great.
He just did it and led by example. I love that. How has some of the stuff that you've learned professionally affected and your own personal life as far as we've talked about physicality, but like mentally, like the role of, being a partner, you're married as well. You've got kids. Like how has some of these things that you've been through and demanding kind of this excellence from yourself, how is that translated towards, the relationship that you want and how you work on that? Start there.
I'll tell you what, man, it's so easy. And, I'm coming from the world of being a creative, but it's business. You know what I'm saying? No matter what it is. But I think that it's so easy when you are on a success track. It's so easy to neglect your private life. And just like you constantly have to be creative in business, and if you're in the arts, in your arts profession, and channeling that creative energy to self-betterment and broadening your knowledge base, you also have to channel that creativity into being a husband and all of the different roles there, being a partner, being a lover, being a father, being a father to a son, as opposed to being a father to a daughter. They're different, and it's okay that they're different. Understand that each one of those little people are coming from a completely different experience and being creative with what kind of father they need, and being creative with what you bring to the table as a friend to those people as well. I think that it's so easy to get caught up in your roles, especially nowadays. Everybody with all this fucking virtue signaling and identity politics and putting me in a hole. I'm this. Really, guys. To me, I don't want to be pigeonholed into anything. Please don't do that to me. I would rather live my life way more fluid and creatively and kind of moving with what the moment needs, especially in relationships.
Yeah.
But I learned that. But what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is that just my personality with my relationships? And that's how I apply that to my professional life as well. I guess what I'm saying is, for me, there really is no chasm,
Yeah.
I am not an actor, writer, producer that comes home and now I'm a dad. Like, they really mix. My son is a professional actor and he's doing it, he's 14 years old and he has already a professional career that rivals a lot of adults, and that's another thing. When he was 7 years old, he said he wanted to do this. We're going to do this the right way,
Because you knew.
Yeah. We're going to do this the right way. He got a good rep. He's got an awesome team and he's building a career the right way. And, my daughter, she's not interested. I'm not pushing her that way. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. Did I answer your question?
No, I think you absolutely did. And it made me think of something that is related to this as well. I was just reading an article, I believe it was in the Times a couple of weeks ago, and it was talking about how right now there seems to be this residue that happened kind of starting in the very late 90s and then all the way through, especially the last 10, 15 years, of the whole like personal brand thing, where you need to identify yourself as one thing and you need to like always be doing that, especially with the saturation of social media. Like, it needs to be consistent, personal brand, all this stuff. And this article was talking about the fact that like the pendulum has swung so far that way, where people feel boxed in, that you're supposed to just be this one thing and you can't make mistakes and all this, to it's starting to swing the other way with, Generation Alpha, especially. I love that they give everybody nicknames for age groups. And they're talking about the fact that like they just don't want it at all. They don't want to be on social media. They don't want to share their life. They don't want people knowing about it. So it's interesting to think that like we might be swinging back towards privacy and how that might affect the point you just made, which is that allows you to be whoever you want, to be fluid in how you see yourself, how you react with other people in your family, professionally, personally. It doesn't because we're boxing ourselves in by being a brand. Right. You know what I mean?
For sure. And, I always said, it's like, don't rush to do what the industry is telling you to do. No matter what the industry is, industry at its core is made up of gatekeepers that haven't done what you're doing.
Yeah.
So don't rush to do what they say. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Eventually, no matter what, you're going to be a brand. You don't have to decide. And chances are, if you're rushing out to develop your brand, it's going to come off as phony.
Yeah, totally.
Or at least as though you're faking it till you make it. I always love, man, have you ever been on a private jet?
No, I have never been on a private jet.
Okay. Well, it's really funny because I have, and I'll tell you this. I was at Teterboro Airport and I was expecting to go out onto the tarmac and see everybody taking selfies next to these fucking G5s, man. It's just like, where are all these people with these private jets? Or how many of these kids, these 18-year-old kids, are taking selfies next to a Ferrari or a Lambo? It's like, dude, I drive on the road every day. I've been driving since I was 16 years old, and maybe I've seen 4 Lambos. Where are all these Lambos, dude?
Where are they all?
You know what I mean? It's just like you're a bit full of shit, and you don't have to do that. Eventually your eventually your personality will come through in what it is you're doing, whether you like it or not. You know what I mean? And the less you manipulate it, the more, my guess is, you're going to have a real audience that's really into who you are.
It's kind of like severing like different spokes on a wheel too, that could be good for you or good for the people you interact with. But if you decide like, no, I'm this thing and I need to stay on brand as a leader or an influencer or whatever, but like, I wouldn't do that. My brand wouldn't do that. It's like, but what if that conversation would have been great?
I mean,
what if that would have been a great thing to explore? Like,
I totally hear you. And believe me, this is crossing into not my expertise, but you know,
we get to talk about whatever we want.
I would say that if you're a soap company and you decide that you're going to make wing nuts, that's probably a bad idea. you know what I mean?
Thank you for using the wing nut example. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
You know, if we think in terms of absurd extremes, yeah, you should probably stay on brand. Like if you're trying to be a writer, you probably shouldn't decide that you're going to start talking about skydiving, you know, unless you're writing a book about skydiving. But
it's the one exception.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I like where this conversation has gone so far. We've touched on several different things. One of the things that I would love to talk about as well is I've seen you specifically do extreme challenges for yourself.
Yeah.
Like you love, it seems like you love setting up a finite amount of time where you're going to try and work on a very specific thing, kind of like you're a scientist.
Yeah.
And you want to see either whether it's physical or mental, what the outcome will be on the other side.
Right.
And then like a scientist, write down your results.
Yeah.
And then try something different or double down on that if you got good results.
Right.
When did you start doing that?
Man.
Has that always been something that you've done? Or is that
I don't know. I think that geez, man. I don't know. Like it goes along with that whole spite thing again, you know, like I'm going to show this fictitious person that doesn't exist that I'm going to do it, you know, and I will, you left out one caveat. Often these extreme challenges I do for myself are just outside of the realm of possible. You know? But I'm going to, I'll do it, man. I'm going to show you, you know, I don't always do it. But the journey to try to get there definitely changes you.
How does that relate specifically to, you've had a career, just another evolution of your career in the last several years, which is you have been writing more. In fact, I know we can't go into it, but those of you who listen to this podcast a year from now or so, if you see a new series with Steve Cirbus in it, you'll know that you heard it here first. But your journey from a performer to a writer and a producer. Yeah. Producing, you probably learned about by, like the situation you just talked about, little micro interactions of being on set, seeing how it's done, getting comfortable with that. But writing is a whole other thing. And then pitching to networks. Yeah. How do you feel like what you've done as far as self-mastery maybe prepared you for that? How did you apply some of that?
It's a really great question, man. Because when we were starting to go into our pitch meetings, my wife, I remember her saying, "Are you nervous?" And I remember thinking, no, right?
And was that surprising?
Yeah, it was a little bit. I'm like, no, actually not at all, you know? I think, you know, some of that comes out of a belief in yourself. Look, man, I'm not new to this, you know. I've worked with scripts my whole adult life now. I know what makes a good story. I know, you know, I know all the technical shit.
Because you've been in it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but that aside, I just think that, sorry, I'm getting a little echo. Oh, it fixed again. That aside, I think it comes from scars, man. I think it comes from.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think it comes from failure Because look, I tell my son this. We set out to live big lives with our kids, you know? And from an early age, I tried, because we don't have it anymore. I tried to incorporate rite of passage with my children. And it's something that I didn't have as a child. And you say, where do these extreme challenges for myself come from? It's because I'm setting up rites of passage for myself. I know that through trial, you come out the other side different. You know, you come out of it evolved in some way. And I think that, and I tell him that, you know, we risk big, and with big risk comes big success. But also with big risk comes big failure. And it's a different way of living. But through the course of time, experiencing major failure, and I'm talking major downs, where, you know, you're worried about, you know, I've had Christmases where I was selling clothes to consignment shops so I could buy Christmas presents. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And, but through gaining those scars, you tend to, over time, realize that the enormity of consequence is really always in your mind. That consequence really doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Negative consequences are instilled fears from somewhere in your journey, whether it was your fucking priest, your mom, your father, a teacher, a guidance counselor. Somebody instilled these monumental cliffs of, if you go over that, it's bad news. There's no coming back. And once you go over a few of those cliffs, you realize, oh, you know, it's like, that didn't even hurt. You know,
man, this is so good for people to hear. That's totally been my experience as well. Yeah. And it's surprising sometimes, right? Yeah. It's surprising. You're like, no, I really thought I was going to fall 1,000 feet. Yeah. And I'm not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, you know, that comes from everything. That comes from, you know, legal shit, getting sued, you know, all these fucking fears, man, that comes from, you know, debt.
Yeah.
You know, it comes from all of these things that you're like, well, if this happens, then Jesus. But really, these are instilled bullshit fears to keep you from taking risks, man. You know, and I don't want to get into conspiracy theory-esque bullshit, but I'll say this, that most of the fears in your head that really make your stomach go in knots aren't from your experience. They're from somebody telling you.
Oh man, that's so good. So good. Yeah. It's so true. So many things that I know I've been afraid of in my own life, to risk or to try, or I'm not going to risk that because then this will happen. Then this will happen was just something that someone told someone that told someone that I heard. Yeah. It's not even reality. It's someone else's view of reality that's so far removed from me, but I've accepted it truth somewhere, like you said, from a parent, a teacher, a guidance counselor, whoever it was, when actually that might not even be true.
Yeah, that's absolute. That's it in a nutshell. And, you know, it's the name of your show, right?
Yeah, right. The stories.
What fucking stories are you listening to?
Yep.
You know, and if you're finding yourself crippled by a fear, I guarantee you didn't gain that fear by failure. I guarantee you that you didn't gain that fear by, you know, Unless you were like attacked by a lion, chances are you're going to be afraid of lions. But you know what I mean? It's like, because those failures and those experiences, they don't instill fear, man. What they do is they empower you with battle wounds.
Those scars you were talking about, just to bring this full circle. It's just like once you have those scars, and it's almost like you're building up a fear tolerance.
Totally.
You're like, oh no, that's not something to actually be afraid of, because see this scar right here? I was fine. And so if I'm walking into right now, even though this might be my first time walking into this particular pitch room,
right,
or this particular script that I'm submitting, or this version that I've had to rewrite 5 times, that's okay. I've had to rewrite it.
That's right.
That's all right. It's part of the process.
Yeah.
I'm not going to die. It'll be fine.
Absolutely. And, also, if we go into this pitch room and they say, oh, we love it, but not right now. It's like, okay. If we walked into, all of them, and which we did, we walked into 15 of them and they all said no. And it wasn't like, oh, shucks, we had worked on it. I was working on this for 2 years. I'm not going to say, well, they said no. We had a plan. It's just like, well, fuck it. We're going to self-produce. We're going to self-produce the pilot on YouTube, and it's going to go viral, and somebody will pick us up. But we didn't have to. We actually got a call from a network that we didn't even pitch to. They just wanted it because they read it.
If you hadn't that's what I'm talking about, that building up those scars you were talking about, that fear tolerance, because by going and pitching to all those different ones, someone called someone else, or there was something. If you hadn't done that,
that's right,
the word would have never gotten to that specific executive that happened to be at a different network that was like, no, we might be interested in. Like, if you had given up after the first pitch, and been embarrassed and not wanted to do it again, you probably wouldn't have gotten the same result.
Oh, dude, there was so many, like, I haven't even shared all these stories with you. We had partnered with a very famous high-level production company. And my writing partner and one of the producers at this production company, because sometimes if you partner with a production company and you come in as a team for pitches, sometimes that makes networks say, oh, they're 3 steps ahead of the game. This is great. So we went that route, and it didn't take long to realize that my writing partner and one of the producers over there just didn't get along. They just didn't get along. They didn't have the same sensibilities. They whatever. It didn't work. And the week before we started pitching, and when you partner with a production company, they set up the pitches, right? A week before we went into pitching, this producer at this production company that we partnered with told us to fuck off, basically. Said, this isn't working. We're backing out, right? We're no longer partners.
Like before you're going to be going in these rooms, and like
this was the business day week before we. I think this was on a Tuesday, and we started pitching the following Monday, and we were just like, what do we still pitch? Do we still have these meetings? And of course we did. They said, well, we wanted to hear your pitch, not because you were partnered with said production company. So, but there's a lot of that along the way.
A lot of chances to go, oh, we must not know what we're doing, or, oh, we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
A lot of chances to back out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's funny because going along with those scars, and I was just talking to my wife, who is, she works as a clinical content director for one of the major online mental health. She's a psychologist, online mental health companies. And this is like her 3rd one she's worked with. As clinical content director, she's in charge of making sure that everything that's going out to the public is clinically sound. So it's not just some copywriter saying, hey, if you're feeling down on Thanksgiving, but it's, but
it's actually based in
it's
science.
clinically sound, right? So, of course, the last couple of years, it's just natural disaster, social trauma, one right after the other. And these companies have to sweep in and make some sort of statement or, offer some level of empathy, at least to that community that's suffering. And it's just one thing after the next, after the next, after the next, it seems like, where she's always dealing with a international crisis. And, a few weeks ago, she gets done with her day and she was just exhausted, man. and I looked at her and I'm just like, but it made her laugh, but I really meant it sincerely. I'm like, I'm surprised you still get depressed. Like, are you calloused to this shit yet? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, funny.
It's like these scars forge you into something. It's just like training. It's just like destroying a muscle. It grows. It's the same. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm surprised you still get depressed. And she, that made her laugh. But I'm like, then I pretended I was joking, but I was dead serious.
But she's a very evolved human being as well. Like, full disclosure. Is it okay if we say her name on the podcast? Sure. Dr. Amy Cirbus is amazing. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. Has been for years. Great. And now, of course, her career trajectory is taking off with several of these large corporations.
Yeah.
She's doing the good work for mental health out there. Yeah.
She is, for sure.
Well, my friend, thank you so much for the time that you've spent with me today.
This is great, man.
I've already been editing in my head. I'm like, oh, we have to make sure that gets pulled to the front. Like, I feel like I've learned several things by talking with you today, and it's making me think about, in my own life and my own business that's going on right now. And we were talking a little bit about this before we got started. Like, this has really helped me with my day, honestly, because like I'm going through some stuff right now where a lot of businesses are where, the whole threat of specter of recession seems to be solidifying. Mm-hmm. Like, people are not even afraid to say, like, we're in a recession now. And so I'm seeing other colleagues like getting job offers rescinded, teams are getting shrunk, different people that we've been pitching to where normally it's just like, hey, here's the contract, they sign it, we start. All of a sudden budgets are going away. Everyone's pulling everything back in really tightly. A lot of scarcity and fear mindset stories starting to happen. And so just hearing you talk about like, there's really, that cliff is actually just like 1.5 feet. Yeah. It's not a 1,000-foot drop.
Yeah.
Like, and even if there is something, like the scars you're going to build up are going to help you. You can wrap them in self-mastery. You can you can control the things you can control.
Yeah.
And you can lead by example, and you can be kind to people.
Yeah, for sure, man. And, it's like this. I'll just add one more thing without hijacking your closing comments. But this is
go for it.
But this is for you in particular, Aaron. It's like at one point, because me too, and everybody, but at one point in your life, no matter how successful you are right now, at one point you didn't have shit.
Mm-hmm.
You might have had somebody else's shit and been born lucky, but at one point in your life, you didn't have anything. You didn't have a network. You didn't have a support system. You really didn't have a leg to stand on with your knowledge base or your skills base. And at one point you were there. And I guarantee you weren't miserable. You still had fun. You still laughed. You still had love. And if it goes away, you're still going to have all those things. And then you just build it back again. That's it. You know? That's it. It's a journey.
It really is that simple, but we make it so much more complicated in our head.
It is.
It's so good.
Because we work hard. You know, I'm assuming that most of your listeners are pretty high level performers and or desire to be. And,
yes.
You know, so the thing is that we work our asses off. High level performers work hard and they get super obsessive. And when we acquire shit, when we gain success, we want to hold on to it, man, because that's hard earned. That's hard earned.
So true.
So that sucks. And that's fear inducing that you're going to lose everything you worked for. But really, at the end of the day, you know, you really have to look at what it is you're doing. And for the most part, the things that you've acquired, and I'm not getting zen on you, but the things that you've acquired, the successes that you've acquired aren't what's keeping you coming back. What's keeping you coming back is the thrill of the pursuit. And,
it's so true.
And that'll always be there.
Otherwise, we'd be bored as hell.
Right.
Yep. So true. It's so good. So good.
Yeah.
See, and he's a life coach on top of all this. So it's just like,
I'm really not.
You're my life coach now. Too bad. I'm going to let you bill me for the hour. All right. Dude, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you, man.
I know
anytime.
I've gotten stuff out of this, and I know people that are listening to this are being able to get something out of it as well and apply it to wherever they're at as well. So thank you so much for spending your time.
Of course, man. Anytime.